Morning everybody, great to be back with you today. We're continuing to look at the idea of what wealth should look like in our lives and get a wise perspective through Solomon and the book of Proverbs on how to handle materialism and the issues of wealth that are so important in our lives. Yesterday we focused on the fact that wealth was a terrible source if you're looking for happiness. Do not look to wealth to make you happy. Just read the book of Ecclesiastes, the early chapters of that book, and you'll see how fickle finance and chasing after money actually can be if happiness is what you're looking for. The second thing I want you to notice today about wealth is that it's an incredible source of temptation. Not only is it an awful source to try and find happiness, but it's probably one of the greatest senses or sources of temptation that is out there. In Proverbs 28 verse 6 it says this: "Better a poor man whose walk is blameless than a rich man whose ways are perverse." When we look at the comparison between that which a rich man has and the challenges that he faces in learning to manage his wealth, sometimes it's better just to be poor and not have to face those particular temptations. The first temptation that we face when it comes to the issue of wealth is we tend to measure God's blessing more by His provision than by His presence, where we look at the things we have and the money that we have and the wealth that we have, and we think that because we have that is necessarily the blessing of God. Well, it may be, but it may not be, because it may be a blessing, but it can also be a temptation. That's why we need to apply wisdom to it. I met a group from Norway a little while back. They were touring and they heard about the Norwegian church and they wanted to see this. So I was talking with them and I was telling them about the passion of our church to reach into a poor and under-resourced and marginalized community. And one man came to me afterwards and he said, "I cannot help but know that you notice that you talk a lot about God in the context of poverty." He said, "In Norway we don't need God." And I said, "Well, why don't you need God?" He said, "Well, we have everything that we need there." You see, he fell into the trap of measuring God's blessing by the fact that he had His provision. And that's wrong. We measure God's blessing not by His provision, but by His presence. And so prosperity can make you think that this could be the blessing of God. I have met many people who, when I ask them, "How are you doing?" and they say, "Hey Trevor, I'm blessed, man. I'm really blessed." And they tell me what's going on in their business and how much money they're making, and I'm thinking in the back of my mind, well, I sure hope this is a blessing and doesn't become a curse, because it could be one or the other, determined by what you do with it. Advertising plays a huge role in telling us how to be happy. Happiness is just one purchase away. If you just buy this thing and buy that thing, then you will of all people be the most happy. And around the whole thesis that revolves around advertising is based on the fact of happiness. If you just have this, you'll be happy. Well, people, we've been conned. We've been conned because you go to the local garbage dump and you'll see how yesterday's dreams and yesterday's most desired possessions are lying on the garbage heap of life. And we realize when we look at this that happiness is elusive, but it certainly is not to be found in things. And the greatest temptation we have is to look for things to make that. Everybody out there just seems to want more, but they find that more is never enough. It's never enough. I wish we could live in the world like a fish lives in the sea. I love it, you look at the medium that a fish lives in, and a fish lives in the medium of salty water. And yet when you catch that fish and you cook it, what's the first thing you put on it? You put salt on it, because it's not salty enough. And the fish has found a way of living in the medium of salt and yet not being tainted by it. I wish we as Christians could be more like that we could live in a materialistic environment without becoming tainted by the things that will draw us away from God, the things that we think are a blessing, and only time will tell whether they are, and become more like a fish, untainted, despite the materialistic environment in which we live. I hope that we're able to just contextualize this into your own life today and say, what are you living for? Are you living for more? Because the bad news is that more is never enough. more chases enough and never catches it. And yet when we become content, as Paul says, no matter what situation I'm in, whether I'm rich or poor, whether I'm hungry or I've been fed, I have found contentment in my love and my relationship with Jesus Christ. That's the source of great happiness. Yesterday we said that wealth was a lousy source of happiness, and today we're saying that wealth can be an incredible source of temptation. So let's manage it well today. Let's go save the world, people.